This never happened. You say nothing.
Who leaked this?
Shut it down!
The helicopter spun out of control, while flames engulfed the tail section in dark night. She was the only one who crawled away from the crash site alive that night. Her radio crackled with orders to stay silent and never speak about the mission. Someone inside their own command had sold their flight path to the enemy forces. Now she carried the evidence needed to burn the entire conspiracy down to ground. Maya stood alone in the rain, watching the casket lower into the cold ground slowly. The flag folded tight by trembling hands represented a promise broken by people above. She wore her dress uniform with pride despite the hole inside her chest now. 4 names were carved into the stone behind her, where the dirt covered boxes. Her team was gone because of a signature on a paper somewhere in Virginia. She did not cry during the service because tears would not bring them back. The general spoke words about honor and sacrifice that felt hollow in her ears. He knew the truth, but his lips were sealed by laws written in darkness. Maya saluted the box one last time before turning away from the grieving families. The mud sucked at her boots as she walked toward the black sedan waiting. Inside the car, the silence was heavy enough to crush a person completely. Her driver was a man she trusted, but even trust was fragile these days. They drove through the gates of the base without speaking a single word together. The rain streaked the windows like tears. The sky refused to shed itself. Maya looked at her reflection and saw a stranger staring back with dead eyes. 8 months had passed since the rotor blades shattered against the mountainside. 8 months of waiting for an investigation that never produced any real results. 8 months of knowing the official report was a lie crafted to protect names. She arrived at her quarters and dropped her bag on the floor heavily. The room was empty, except for the photos taped to the mirror frame. 4 smiling faces looked back at her from a time before the betrayal. She traced the face of the team leader who had died covering her exit. He had pushed her into the ditch just before the missiles struck the aircraft. His last words were a command to live and tell the world the truth. Maya had survived, but the guilt was a weight she carried every single day. She poured a drink from the bottle hidden in the bottom of her locker. The liquid burned going down, but it did nothing to numb the pain. Her phone buzzed on the table with a message from an unknown number. The text said only one word that made her heart stop beating for a second. The word was Yemen, and it referenced the location where everything went wrong. She deleted the message immediately, but the seed of hope was planted now. Someone knew what happened, and someone was finally willing to talk to her. Maya changed into civilian clothes and pulled a hood over her short hair. She needed to leave the base without being seen by security cameras tonight. The rain provided cover as she slipped through the fence near the woods. Her car was parked off base in a lot reserved for visiting contractors. She started the engine and drove toward the city lights glowing in distance. The streets were wet and reflected the neon signs of bars and restaurants. She needed a place where military personnel gathered, but off-the-record books. The anchor point was a dive bar known for ignoring identification checks completely. Maya parked in the back and walked through the alley to the rear door. The bouncer nodded at her without asking for ID because he knew the type. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of stale beer. Veterans sat in corners nursing drinks and avoiding eye contact with strangers. Maya took a seat at the far end of the bar away from lights. She ordered a bourbon and waited for the contact who had sent the text. 10 minutes passed while she watched the door for anyone matching the description. A man in a gray coat walked in and scanned the room carefully. He looked older than his file suggested, but the eyes were still sharp. He sat on the stool next to her and ordered a whiskey without looking. Maya kept her eyes on her glass while speaking in a low voice. "You said you had information about the mission package from 8 months ago." The man nodded slowly and took a sip of his drink before answering her. "I was the liaison officer who signed the transport request for your team." Maya turned to look at him with intensity burning in her dark eyes. "Why come forward now when you stayed silent through the entire investigation process?" He looked down at his hands, which were shaking slightly around the glass. Because they killed my brother yesterday when he asked too many questions. Maya felt a cold chill run down her spine at the confession just made. This was bigger than a leaked document. It was a systematic execution protocol. The man slid a napkin across the bar with an address written on it. Everything you need is on a server at this location outside of Charlottesville. You have 48 hours before they wipe the drives and move assets. Maya took the napkin and memorized the address before burning it in ashtray. What is the name of the person who authorized the sale of us? The man stood up and pulled his coat tight around his trembling body. Julian Blackwood runs Aegis Global, and he owns half the senators in Washington. He walked away quickly and disappeared into the rain before she could follow. Maya finished her drink and left the bar with a new purpose burning. She was no longer just a survivor, she was a hunter seeking justice. The drive back to her quarters felt longer than the flight home had. She sat on the bed and looked at the photos of her fallen friends. I will not let them die for nothing, she whispered to the empty room. The address on the napkin was a private estate owned by a shell company. She would need help to breach the security systems protecting that location fully. There were only 2 people she trusted enough to ask for this kind of help. Both were former operators who owed her their lives from missions in sand. She picked up her encrypted phone and dialed the first number on list. The voice on the other end answered after the second ring without hesitation. Maya told him to meet at the safe house in 1 hour exactly. She hung up and dialed the second number, knowing the answer would be yes. These were her people, and they would not question the mission objectives ever. She packed her gear bag with tools needed for electronic surveillance and entry. The rain continued to fall outside as she prepared for war on home soil. This time the enemy wore suits instead of camouflage and carried briefcases, not rifles. But the danger was just as lethal for anyone who got in the way. Maya checked her weapon and secured it in the hidden compartment of her car. She drove out of the parking lot and merged onto the highway heading north. The lights of the city faded in the rear view mirror as she left. Darkness swallowed the road ahead, but she drove with confidence and clear intent. The safe house was a cabin deep in the woods used for off-book meetings. She arrived 10 minutes early and scanned the perimeter for any signs of tracking. Nothing moved in the trees, except the wind shaking the leaves gently above. She entered the cabin and turned on the single lamp sitting on the table. 2 chairs were placed opposite each other, ready for the conversation to begin. Maya sat and waited for the sound of engines approaching on the gravel drive. The first vehicle arrived with headlights off and parked behind the second car. Doors opened and closed, and heavy boots walked up the steps to the door. Maya opened the lock and let her 2 oldest friends step into the light. Jax was a former sniper who never missed a shot when it mattered most. Kira was an explosives expert who could build a bomb out of household items. They looked at Maya and saw the resolve hardening in her face clearly. Jax sat down and placed his rifle on the table without asking questions yet. Kira leaned against the wall and crossed her arms, waiting for the briefing start. Maya took a breath and began to explain what she had learned tonight. Our team was sold to the highest bidder by a defense contractor named Blackwood. Jax did not flinch, but his eyes narrowed as he processed the information. Kira pushed off the wall and walked over to look at the map. We need to hit his server farm before they realize we are coming. Maya nodded and pointed to the location marked on the topographic map table. Security is heavy, but there is a blind spot in the camera coverage. We have 48 hours to get in, get the data, and get out. Jax checked the action on his rifle and nodded his approval of the plan. Kira started sketching out the entry points on a napkin with a pen. This is suicide, Maya, but if anyone can pull it off, it is us. Maya looked at both of them and felt the bond of shared history. We do this for the 4 who cannot speak for themselves anymore today. They spent the next 3 hours refining the plan until every variable was covered. There was no room for error when the target was this powerful and connected. Blackwood would have mercenaries on payroll who would not hesitate to shoot to kill. Maya knew the risks, but she also knew the cost of doing nothing. Justice was not given freely, it had to be taken with force sometimes. They finished the briefing and checked their gear one last time before sleeping. Morning would come too soon and bring with it the start of the end. Maya lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling thinking of her friends. She promised them justice, and she intended to keep that promise no matter cost. The rain stopped outside, and the silence of the woods settled over the cabin. Sleep came in fragments, but her mind was already running through the scenarios. Every move had to be precise, because one mistake would mean death for all. She closed her eyes and forced her body to rest before the storm broke. The sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red. Maya woke up before the alarm and started the coffee pot on the stove. Jax and Kira were already awake, checking their weapons and packing their bags. The mood was somber, but focused like it always was before a big job. They ate a quick meal without talking, because words were not necessary right now. Maya handed each of them a folder containing the intelligence on the target. Blackwood's estate was fortified like a military base, with sensors and armed guards. We go in at night when the shift change creates a window of opportunity. Kira studied the blueprints and pointed out the location of the main server. It is in the basement behind a biometric lock that requires 2 keys. Jax looked up from his rifle and asked about the guard rotation schedule. There are 12 men on the property at any given time during the night. Maya tapped the map where the drainage tunnel entered the property from the north. This is our entry point because it does not appear on any current schematics. Kira raised an eyebrow and asked how Maya knew about the hidden tunnel. I found the original construction permits in the county archives from 1961. Jax smiled for the first time since they met because he liked the odds. Old infrastructure is always the weak point in modern security systems designed today. They loaded the gear into the vehicles and covered them with tarps for concealment. The drive to Charlottesville took 4 hours through winding roads and dense forests. They parked 3 miles from the estate and hiked the rest of the way. The terrain was rough, but they moved silently through the trees like shadows. Maya stopped at the edge of the tree line and observed the house through binoculars. Lights were on in the main building, and vehicles were parked near the gate. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures of guards patrolling the perimeter every 15 minutes. Kira set up the jamming device that would disable the external communication signals. Jax found a position in the trees that offered a clear view of the yard. Maya checked her watch and waited for the exact moment to initiate the breach. The shift change happened at 2 a.m. when the guards were most complacent. She signaled to Kira, who activated the jammer, causing the cameras to loop. The window was open for 12 minutes before the system reset and detected the anomaly. Maya moved toward the tunnel entrance and crawled into the dark concrete pipe. The water was cold and smelled of rust, but she did not slow her pace. Jax followed close behind her, with Kira covering the rear from the outside. The tunnel was tight and required them to move on their hands and knees. Maya counted the seconds in her head to ensure they stayed within the window. They emerged into the basement of the house through a grate in the floor. The room was filled with humming servers and blinking lights, indicating active data transfer. Kira moved to the main terminal and plugged in the decryption drive immediately. Jax secured the door and listened for any footsteps approaching from the hallway. Maya watched the progress bar on the screen, knowing time was running out fast. The download was taking longer than expected because the files were heavily encrypted. Kira whispered that she needed 3 more minutes to bypass the final firewall. Maya nodded and kept her weapon raised ready to defend the position if needed. A sound echoed from the stairwell that made all 3 of them freeze instantly. Someone was coming down the stairs, and they were not following the normal patrol route. Jax signaled that he would hold the door while they finished the download. Maya shook her head because leaving him behind was not an option for her. They had to move now, even if the data transfer was not complete yet. Kira pulled the drive with 80% of the files saved on it. That would have to be enough to expose the conspiracy and bring them down. Maya signaled the retreat and they moved back toward the tunnel entrance quickly. The door burst open, and a guard shouted into his radio about the intruders. Jax fired 2 suppressed shots that dropped the guard before he could react. More footsteps were coming down the stairs, indicating the alarm had been raised. They reached the tunnel and crawled back into the darkness while bullets sparked behind. Kira sealed the grate behind them to delay the pursuit from following immediately. The water rushed around them as they moved faster than they had come in. Maya could hear the sounds of dogs barking above ground near the tunnel exit. They emerged into the woods and ran toward the extraction point without looking back. Explosions rocked the estate behind them as Kira's remote charges destroyed the server room. The fire lit up the night sky and signaled the end of the evidence there. But they had the copy, and that was all that mattered for the truth. They reached the vehicles and drove away into the darkness before authorities arrived. Maya looked at the drive in her hand and felt a surge of relief. This was the proof needed to clear their names and honor the fallen soldiers. Jax drove the car while Kira monitored the police bands for any updates on Chase. There was no pursuit because Blackwood would not want attention drawn to the estate. He would claim it was an electrical fire and move his operations elsewhere quietly. Maya knew they had to release the information before he could spin the narrative. They returned to the safe house and secured the perimeter for the night again. Kira began organizing the files into packages ready for distribution to major news outlets. Jax cleaned his weapon and reloaded the magazines for the next phase of operation. Maya sat at the table and wrote the cover letter for the journalists receiving data. She explained who they were and why this story needed to be published immediately. 5 families deserved to know the real reason their sons and daughters died in sand. She attached the financial records showing the payments from Blackwood to foreign entities. The communication logs proved he knew the mission details before the team deployed. This was not negligence, it was premeditated murder for profit and political leverage. Maya hit the send button and watched the progress bars move across the screen. There was no turning back now because the truth was out of their hands. The ball was in the court of the media and the government to act. She leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes, feeling the exhaustion finally. Jax poured a cup of coffee and handed it to her without saying a word. Kira sat on the floor and cleaned the dirt from under her fingernails slowly. They had done their part, and now they had to wait for the fallout. Blackwood would not go quietly, and he would try to silence them permanently now. Maya knew the danger was not over, but she felt lighter than before. The ghosts of her team were still there, but they were no longer silent. They were screaming for justice through the data that was now flying through wires. Morning would bring the news cycles and the beginning of the public reckoning. Maya drank the coffee and watched the sun rise over the trees outside window. She was ready for whatever came next because she had nothing left to lose. The fight was just beginning, and she would stand until the truth was told. The news broke at 6 a.m. with headlines splashed across every major network screen. Documents leaked from a classified server implicated a defense contractor in treasonous activities. Maya watched the television in the safe house while drinking her second cup of coffee. The anchor read the names of the senators who had received bribes from Blackwood. Jax stood by the window, watching the road for any signs of approaching vehicles. Kira was on the phone with a contact inside the FBI Counterintelligence Division. They confirmed that raids were happening simultaneously at multiple offices owned by Aegis Global. Blackwood had not been arrested yet because he was currently on a private jet. Maya felt a spike of anger knowing he was trying to flee the country. She called the contact at the FAA who owed her a favor from past. She requested a ground stop on all private flights departing from the regional airport. The contact hesitated, but agreed when Maya mentioned the names on the leaked list. Blackwood's jet was diverted to a military airfield, where agents were waiting to arrest. Maya hung up the phone and told the team that the target was grounded. Jax nodded and checked the safety on his rifle, just in case things went wrong. Kira smiled for the first time in days, because the plan was working perfectly. The public outcry was growing as families of the fallen saw the evidence online. Protests formed outside the Capitol building, demanding accountability for the deaths of soldiers. Maya knew this was the moment where the system would try to protect itself. Powerful people would try to bury the story under layers of bureaucracy and delay. She prepared herself for the summons to testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee. It would be a public spectacle designed to intimidate her into changing her story. But she had the evidence and the support of the media protecting her now. The phone rang, and it was the general who had spoken at the funeral. He apologized for his silence and promised to support her testimony with official records. Maya accepted his apology, but told him that actions mattered more than words now. He agreed to release the original mission logs that contradicted the official report publicly. This would confirm everything Maya had accused Blackwood of doing to her team. The day moved fast, with interviews and statements being prepared by her legal team. She refused to hide behind lawyers and insisted on speaking directly to the people. Her face was on every screen, and her voice was heard across the nation. She told the story of the ambush and how the enemy knew their position. She described the last moments of her friends and the promise she made to them. The nation watched in silence as a young woman demanded justice for the dead. Blackwood was arraigned in a federal court and denied bail due to flight risk. His lawyers claimed the evidence was fabricated, but the digital signatures proved otherwise. Senators named in the documents began to resign one by one to avoid indictment. The Department of Defense announced a full review of all contractor relationships and protocols. Maya felt a sense of vindication, but it did not bring her friends back. Nothing could undo the loss, but at least their deaths were not in vain. She received calls from the families who thanked her for finding the truth for them. One mother told her that knowing the reason helped her sleep at night finally. That meant more to Maya than any medal or promotion the military could offer. She spent the evening packing her gear because she knew her work was done. The team would disband and return to their lives away from the spotlight. Jax planned to open a training facility for veterans struggling with transition to civilian life. Kira intended to work with organizations that cleared landmines in conflict zones abroad. Maya had not decided what she would do next with her life after this. She looked at the photos of her team one last time before putting them away. They were heroes not because they died, but because of how they lived their lives. She would carry their memory forward in everything she did from this day on. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, and she needed to prepare her statement. Every word had to be precise, because the enemies were still watching for mistakes. Maya wrote through the night, outlining the timeline of events from the beginning. She included every detail, no matter how small, because the devil was in details. Morning came, and she showered and put on the suit she had bought for this. It was dark blue and tailored to fit perfectly without restricting her movement at all. She looked in the mirror and saw the officer she had become through the fire. Jax drove her to the airport, where a government jet was waiting to take her. Kira stayed behind to monitor the security feeds at the safe house during absence. The flight to Washington was smooth and gave Maya time to review her notes again. She landed at Andrews Air Force Base and was escorted to the Capitol building. Reporters lined the streets shouting questions that she ignored while walking to the entrance. Inside the halls of power, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation of the testimony. She was led to a waiting room where other witnesses were gathering nervously together. Maya sat alone and closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing to stay calm. The door opened, and a clerk announced that the committee was ready to begin. She stood up and walked into the hearing room filled with cameras and people. The senators sat behind a long table, with nameplates indicating their rank and state. Blackwood was not there, but his lawyers were present to object to every statement. Maya took the seat in the center and adjusted the microphone in front of her. The chairman gavels the room to order and asks her to state her name. She speaks clearly and identifies herself as the sole survivor of the ambushed unit. The room goes silent as she begins to recount the events of that fatal night. She does not hesitate when describing the betrayal that led to the deaths of 4. Her voice does not waver even when she talks about the friend who saved her. The senators listen intently, some taking notes, while others look down at their desks. She presents the evidence, chronologically showing the link between Blackwood and the enemy network. The lawyers object repeatedly, but the chairman overrules them, allowing her to continue speaking. Maya finishes her statement and waits for the questions from the committee members. The first senator asks about the chain of command and who authorized the mission. She answers truthfully, naming the officers who were compromised by the contractor bribes. Another senator asks if she feels anger toward the government for the cover-up. Maya pauses and chooses her words carefully to distinguish between the system and individuals. She says she believes in the mission, but not in the people who corrupted it. The hearing lasts for 4 hours without a break, while the world watches online. When it concludes, the chairman thanks her for her courage and her service to country. Maya stands and salutes the flag before walking out of the room without looking back. The press swarm her outside, but she only stops to give one short statement. She says that justice is not a destination, but a journey that requires constant vigilance. Then she gets into the car and leaves the Capitol behind her for good. The drive to the airport is quiet, and she feels the weight lifting off shoulders. It is over now, and the truth has been spoken in the halls of power. She boards the plane and looks out the window as the city fades below. Her phone buzzes with messages of support from strangers all over the world. She turns it off and leans back in the seat, ready to finally rest. The mission is complete, but the war for integrity is never truly finished anywhere. She knows she will always be watching for the next threat to the truth. But for now, she allows herself to breathe and feel the sun on her face. The clouds part and the sky is blue, reminding her that storms do pass eventually. She closes her eyes and dreams of a place where soldiers do not die for lies. The weeks following the hearing were a blur of media requests and official inquiries. Maya declined most interviews, preferring to let the evidence speak for itself quietly. She returned to her home base and resumed her duties with a renewed focus. The culture had shifted slightly as leaders became more cautious about contractor relationships. Blackwood was awaiting trial in a federal prison while his empire crumbled around him. His assets were frozen, and his company was under investigation for fraud and treason. Maya received a letter from the mother of the team leader who died in Yemen. The letter thanked her for giving her son back his honor and his story. Maya kept the letter in her pocket and read it whenever she felt doubt. It reminded her why she fought so hard against the system that protected liars. Jax and Kira visited her on base, and they shared a meal in the mess hall. They talked about the future and the possibilities of working together on new projects. There was a sense of camaraderie that remained strong despite the time apart. They had survived something that would have broken most people without their bond. Maya walked them to the gate and watched them drive away into the evening. She stood there for a long time, thinking about the path that lay ahead. Her career was secure, but her soul was still healing from the wounds of war. She spent her evenings running along the perimeter fence to clear her mind. The rhythm of her boots on the pavement helped her process the trauma slowly. One night she stopped at the memorial wall where the names of the fallen were. She traced the letters of her friends' names with her finger, feeling the cold stone. "I am still here," she whispered to the wind that rustled the trees nearby. "And I will make sure you are never forgotten by the people you served." A general approached her quietly and stood beside her, looking at the same names. He did not speak, immediately giving her the space to finish her moment of grief. When she turned to him, he offered a handshake and a look of respect. He told her that changes were being made at the highest levels of command. New protocols were being implemented to prevent contractors from having access to mission data. Maya nodded, acknowledging the progress, but knowing that vigilance was still required always. The general asked if she would consider taking a role in the new oversight division. It would involve investigating corruption and ensuring the integrity of future operations globally. Maya considered the offer, knowing it would keep her in the fight for truth. She agreed to take the position because someone needed to watch the watchers closely. The job would be dangerous, but she was no longer afraid of the shadows. She had walked through the fire and come out stronger on the other side. Training for the new role began immediately with classes on law and finance. She learned how to follow money trails and identify conflicts of interest in contracts. It was a different kind of warfare, but the stakes were just as high. Corruption killed soldiers just as surely as bullets did in the combat zones. Maya excelled in the coursework and earned the respect of her civilian colleagues. They saw her not just as a soldier, but as a guardian of ethics. She built a team of investigators who were immune to bribery and intimidation tactics. Together, they began auditing the contracts that had been signed during the previous administration. They found irregularities in dozens of deals that needed to be investigated further. Each case was a step toward cleaning the institution from the inside out. Maya knew it would take years to fix the damage done by greed. But she was willing to spend the rest of her career on this mission. The memories of her team fueled her drive to ensure no one else suffered. She visited the families periodically to update them on the progress of reforms. They became her extended family, and she found comfort in their shared loss. Together, they advocated for legislation that would protect service members from corporate exploitation. The bill was introduced in Congress and gained bipartisan support due to the public outcry. Maya testified again this time not as a victim, but as an expert witness. She spoke with authority about the systemic issues that allowed the betrayal to happen. The bill passed and was signed into law by the president in a ceremony. Maya stood in the back of the room, watching the pen sign the paper. It was a small victory, but it represented a shift in the right direction. She left the ceremony and walked out into the sunlight feeling a sense of peace. The work was never done, but today was a good day for the troops. She drove back to base and parked her car in the spot assigned to her. Inside her office, she hung the photos of her team on the wall prominently. They watched over her as she worked late into the night reviewing files. Her phone rang, and it was Kira calling to invite her to a reunion. Maya accepted the invitation, knowing it was time to celebrate the lives lost. They would gather at the bar where it all started to honor the fallen. It was a way to close the chapter and begin the next one together. Maya finished her work and locked the office door for the weekend finally. She walked to her car and looked up at the stars shining above base. The sky was clear, and the air was cool, signaling the change of seasons. She got in the car and started the engine ready to drive toward friends. The road was open and the journey ahead was uncertain, but she was ready. She had faced the darkness and brought back the light for those who could not. Now she would live for them and ensure their legacy endured through her actions. The engine hummed smoothly as she merged onto the highway, leaving the base behind. Music played softly in the background, filling the silence with a familiar melody. She sang along quietly, remembering the songs they used to listen to in desert. The memories were painful, but they were also beautiful reminders of who they were. Maya smiled as she drove, knowing that she was exactly where she needed to be. The past was a teacher, and the future was a promise she intended to keep. She arrived at the bar and saw the lights glowing warmly in the night. Friends were waiting inside, and the night would be filled with stories and laughter. It was not an ending, but a continuation of the bond that death could not break. Maya stepped out of the car and walked toward the door with purpose in stride. The night was young, and the mission of remembrance was just getting started now. The bar was filled with the sound of laughter and the clinking of glasses. Maya walked in and was greeted by hugs from veterans who knew her story. Jax and Kira were at a large table in the back reserved for the group. They raised their glasses when she approached and cheered for her survival and success. Maya sat down and ordered a drink that she intended to sip slowly tonight. The atmosphere was celebratory, but there was an undercurrent of solemn respect for the absent. A toast was made to the 4 who did not make it home from war. Everyone stood and raised their glasses in silence, honoring the sacrifice made in sand. Maya felt the warmth of the community surrounding her like a shield against pain. These were her people who understood the cost of the freedom they enjoyed daily. They talked about old missions and the funny moments that happened between the danger. Stories were shared about the team leader who always kept a deck of cards handy. He used to play poker with the locals to gather intelligence without raising suspicion. Maya laughed, remembering how he could bluff anyone even when he had nothing. The laughter turned to tears briefly as they remembered the light that was lost. But the tears were not of despair, they were of love and enduring connection. Kira pulled out a box and placed it on the table for everyone to see. Inside were challenge coins, minted specifically to honor the memory of the fallen unit. Each coin had the names of the 5 members engraved on the edge permanently. Maya took one and held it in her palm, feeling the weight of the metal. It was a tangible reminder that their service was recognized and valued by peers. They passed the coins around, and each person took a moment to hold one. It was a ritual of remembrance that bound them together in a sacred promise. They promised to look out for each other and to never let the truth fade. Maya looked around the table and saw faces hardened by war but soft with hope. These were the people who would carry the torch when she was gone someday. The night wore on, and the conversations deepened into discussions about the future. Many were struggling with the transition to civilian life and the loss of purpose. Maya shared her experience with the oversight role and how it gave her meaning. She encouraged them to find ways to serve their communities, even without a uniform. Service was not just about fighting, it was about building and protecting values. The bar owner came over and offered a round of drinks on the house. He was a veteran himself and understood the importance of supporting his own kind. Maya thanked him and told him that the community was stronger than any enemy. They stayed until the early hours of the morning when the bar closed down. Outside, the air was crisp and the stars were still visible above the city. They stood on the sidewalk, saying their goodbyes and promising to meet again soon. Maya hugged Jax and Kira, tightly knowing that distance would not separate them. They were family forged in fire and bound by the blood of their friends. Maya walked to her car and took one last look at the group dispersing. She got in and drove home with the challenge coin resting on the dashboard. The city lights blurred past as she navigated the streets toward her apartment. She felt tired, but it was a good tired that came from connection and love. Inside her apartment, she placed the coin on the shelf next to the photos. The collection of memories was growing, but the pain was becoming more manageable now. She poured a glass of water and sat on the couch looking at the wall. The silence was no longer heavy, it was peaceful and filled with presence of friends. Maya closed her eyes and drifted into sleep without the nightmares that used to come. For the first time in months, she dreamed of green fields and blue skis. Her team was there running and laughing without the weight of weapons on backs. They waved to her and told her that she had done well by them. She woke up refreshed and ready to face the new day with energy. The sun was shining through the window, and the birds were singing outside loudly. Maya made breakfast and prepared for another week of work in the oversight division. There were files to review and leads to follow in the ongoing fight for integrity. She dressed in her uniform and pinned the challenge coin to her pocket secretly. It was her talisman and her reminder of why she wore the cloth of country. She drove to work and parked in the lot, feeling a sense of belonging. The building was busy with people coming and going on various official businesses. Maya walked through the security checkpoint and greeted the guards by their first names. Relationships mattered in this job, and she had built trust with the staff. Her office was waiting for her with a stack of new cases on desk. She sat down and opened the first file, ready to dig into the details. The work was tedious, but it was necessary to prevent another tragedy from happening. Every signature she verified was a potential life, saved from corruption and negligence. Maya worked through the morning, taking breaks only to stretch and clear her head. Lunch was with a colleague who was also a veteran and understood the mission. They discussed the challenges of reforming a system that resisted change at every turn. But they agreed that persistence was the only weapon that could defeat the inertia. After lunch, Maya returned to her desk and continued reviewing the financial records. She found a discrepancy in a contract that needed to be flagged for investigation. She made a note and assigned it to a junior analyst for further digging. Mentoring the next generation of investigators was part of her responsibility in this role. She wanted to ensure that the standards of ethics were upheld long after she left. The day ended, and she packed her bag ready to leave the office behind. She stopped at the memorial wall on her way out to touch the names. It was a habit she had formed to acknowledge the cost of the work. Maya drove home and stopped at a grocery store to pick up dinner ingredients. Cooking was a therapeutic activity that helped her unwind from the stress of day. She made a simple meal and ate it while watching the news on television. The story of the contractor scandal was still making headlines but fading slowly. Maya knew that constant vigilance was required to keep the issue in public eye. She turned off the TV and focused on the quiet of her own home. The evening was for rest and preparation for the challenges of the tomorrow. Maya sat on the balcony and watched the city lights twinkle in the darkness. She thought about the journey that had brought her from the crash site to here. It was a long road filled with pain, but also with profound purpose and meaning. She was grateful for the life she had and the opportunity to make difference. The night air was cool, and she pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but she was ready to face them head-on. Maya went inside and locked the door, feeling secure in her sanctuary for night. She slept deeply knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The ghosts were at peace, and the living were fighting for a better future. That was enough for now, and it would have to be enough for always. Months turned into a year, and the changes in the department became visible. Corruption cases were being prosecuted, and contractors were being held accountable for actions. Maya's division had grown, and now included agents from multiple branches of service. They worked together to create a unified standard for ethical conduct in operations. The legislation passed earlier was being enforced with strict penalties for violations of rules. Maya received an award for her contribution to the reform, but she declined ceremony. She believed the recognition belonged to the team who died to expose the truth. Instead, she donated the prize money to a fund for families of fallen soldiers. The fund provided scholarships for children of operators who lost parents in line. Maya visited the schools and met the children who were building their own futures. Seeing their hope gave her the strength to continue the work when it was hard. She knew that the shadow of the betrayal would linger for a long time. Trust was hard to rebuild once it was broken by those in authority positions. But every case they closed was a brick in the wall of new foundation. Maya trained new agents in the art of investigation and the importance of integrity. She taught them that the mission was not just about completing the objective safely. It was about ensuring that the objective was worthy of the risk taken by troops. Her reputation grew as a leader who could not be bought or threatened into silence. Enemies of the reform tried to discredit her, but their attempts failed due to evidence. She kept meticulous records of every decision and every interaction to protect herself. Paranoia was a survival trait that she had learned in the combat zones overseas. It served her well in the bureaucratic battles fought in the halls of Washington. Jax and Kira continued their own work and checked in with her regularly. They formed a network of veterans who supported each other in civilian endeavors. The bond they shared was a resource that helped them navigate the challenges of life. Maya often thought about the man in the bar who had questioned her tattoo. She wondered if he had seen the testimony and changed his perspective on service. It did not matter anymore because she had proven her worth to herself first. The validation from others was secondary to the knowledge that she had done right. One evening, she received a call from the general who had supported her hearing. He told her that a new position was being created for her at higher level. It would involve international oversight of private military companies operating in conflict zones. Maya considered the offer knowing it would require travel and time away from home. But the scope of the problem was global and needed a global solution approach. She accepted the position because the fight for justice did not stop at borders. Corruption was an international disease that required a coordinated response from all nations. Maya prepared for the transition and handed over her current cases to her team. They were ready to lead, and she trusted them to continue the mission without her. Leadership was about building capacity in others so the work could survive your absence. She packed her bags and said goodbye to the city that had been her home. The airport was busy, but she moved through the crowds with confidence and purpose. Her destination was a hub where international treaties were negotiated and enforced strictly. The work would be diplomatic as well as investigative, requiring a different set of skills. Maya was ready to learn and adapt because stagnation was the enemy of progress. She boarded the plane and found her seat looking out the window at runway. The engines roared, and the plane lifted off, carrying her toward the next challenge. She looked down at the city shrinking below and felt a sense of closure. This chapter of her life was ending, but the story was far from over. The mission had evolved, but the core principle remained the same as before. Protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable for their actions and decisions. Maya closed her eyes and rested, knowing that she was on the right path. The turbulence of the flight did not bother her because she was steady inside. She had weathered storms much worse than clouds and wind in the upper atmosphere. When the plane landed, she stepped onto foreign soil with a clear mandate. Her credentials were recognized, and she was greeted by officials who knew her reputation. They were eager to work with someone who had successfully taken down a giant. Maya set up her office and began the process of mapping the global network. It was a complex web of shell companies and hidden accounts across continents. But she had the tools and the team to unravel the knots one by one. The work was slow and frustrating, but progress was being made steadily over time. She communicated with Jax and Kira, who provided support from the private sector. Their insights into contractor operations were invaluable for understanding the methods used to hide. Maya felt a sense of unity with her friends despite the distance between them. They were fighting the same fight on different fronts of the same war. The night was long in the new time zone, but she adjusted quickly to it. Sleep came easily because her conscience was clear and her purpose was defined. She dreamed of the future where soldiers were not commodities to be traded. It was a vision that kept her going when the obstacles seemed insurmountable. Maya woke up and started the day with coffee and a review of intel. There were leads to follow and meetings to attend with international partners today. She dressed in a suit that projected authority and professionalism to the world. The mirror reflected a woman who had survived and thrived despite the odds. She walked out the door and into the bustling city, ready to make impact. The shadow of the past was still there, but it no longer blocked sun. It was a reminder of where she came from and why she kept moving. Maya stepped into the car and directed the driver to the first location. The engine purred and the city lights blurred as they moved through traffic. She was a force of nature driven by justice and fueled by memory of friends. The world would know that the sacrifice of her team was not in vain. Truth was the weapon she wielded, and it was sharper than any blade. She arrived at the building and stepped out, ready to confront the next lie. The doors opened, and she walked in with her head held high always. The International Task Force met in a secure conference room with representatives from 10 nations. Maya sat at the head of the table, presenting the evidence she had gathered. The data showed a pattern of exploitation that spanned across multiple conflict zones. Contractors were using the same playbook to bypass regulations and endanger local populations. The representatives listened intently, knowing that the implications were severe for their governments. Maya proposed a unified treaty that would standardize oversight and enforce strict penalties globally. There was resistance from some nations who benefited from the lack of regulation currently. But the evidence was too compelling to ignore, and the public pressure was mounting. Leaks from Maya's team had reached the media in several countries simultaneously yesterday. Protests were erupting in capital cities, demanding action against the rogue corporations operating. The momentum was shifting, and the window for reform was open wider than before. Maya leveraged the urgency to push for a vote on the treaty framework. The debate was heated, but eventually the majority agreed to sign the accord. It was a historic moment that marked a turning point in military contracting ethics. Maya watched the signatures being placed on the document with a sense of fulfillment. This was the legacy her team would leave behind through her continued efforts. The meeting adjourned, and the representatives shook hands acknowledging the difficulty of task. Maya remained seated for a moment, absorbing the weight of the achievement finally. She had taken a personal tragedy and turned it into a global protection measure. Her phone buzzed with a message from Kira, congratulating her on the success. Jack sent a photo of the team celebrating at the bar with raised glasses. Maya smiled and sent a reply thanking them for their unwavering support always. She packed her briefcase and prepared to leave the conference center for airport. Her work here was done for now, but the implementation would require monitoring. She would return periodically to ensure the terms of the treaty were being met. Compliance was the next battle, and she was ready to fight it with same vigor. The drive to the airport was quiet, and she used the time to reflect. The journey from the crash site to this room had been long and painful. But every step had been necessary to reach this point of meaningful change. Maya checked in for her flight and waited at the gate for boarding call. She observed the people around her and wondered how many knew of the struggle. Most lived in peace because others fought to keep the systems honest and true. She boarded the plane and settled into her seat for the long journey home. The flight attendant offered her a drink, but she declined, preferring to stay sharp. Maya looked out the window as the plane taxied down the runway for takeoff. The wheels lifted off the ground, and the city disappeared beneath the clouds below. She felt a sense of lightness, as if a burden had been finally lifted. The fight was not over, but the foundation for victory had been securely laid. She opened her laptop and began drafting the report on the mission outcomes. Documentation was crucial for ensuring that the progress could not be reversed later. Maya worked through the flight, typing efficiently, while the engine hummed in background. She landed back in her home country and was greeted by fresh air and rain. The weather matched her mood, which was somber but hopeful for the future ahead. She took a taxi to her apartment and dropped her bags by the door. Home felt different now because she had changed so much since she left. Maya walked to the shelf and touched the challenge coin resting next to photos. "I did it," she whispered to the faces smiling back at her from frames. "I hope you are proud of what we accomplished together in your names always." She made tea and sat by the window, watching the rain wash the streets. The city was alive with movement and life, continuing despite the struggles of some. Maya knew she would never be normal again, but she did not want to be. She was a guardian of truth, and that was a role she would keep. The phone rang, and it was the president requesting a meeting at the White House. Maya accepted the invitation, knowing that it was likely regarding her next assignment. She prepared her notes and dressed in her uniform for the formal occasion tomorrow. The night passed quickly, and morning arrived with a clear sky and sunshine. Maya drove to the White House and passed through the security checkpoints efficiently. She was escorted to the Oval Office, where the president waited behind the desk. He stood to greet her and thanked her for her service to the nation. They discussed the impact of the treaty and the challenges of enforcement globally. The president offered her a role as a special advisor on security integrity matters. It would place her in a position to influence policy at the highest level. Maya accepted the role, knowing it was the culmination of her journey so far. She left the White House and stood on the lawn looking at the building. It was a symbol of power, but also of the responsibility to serve people. Maya walked to her car and drove away with a clear sense of direction. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was no longer afraid of the unknown. She had faced the worst and survived to tell the tale and change system. Maya returned to her office and began organizing the transition to her new role. There were briefings to read and people to meet in the coming weeks ahead. But for tonight, she would rest and prepare her mind for the next phase. She ordered dinner and ate while watching a movie to distract her thoughts. Relaxation was a skill she had to learn after years of high alert status. Maya finished the meal and cleaned the kitchen before heading to bed for sleep. She lay down and closed her eyes, letting the darkness take her gently. Dreams came of open fields and friends running toward her with smiles on faces. They did not speak, but their presence was enough to fill her heart with peace. Maya slept through the night without waking and woke up refreshed for new day. The sun was shining, and the birds were singing outside her window loudly. She made coffee and looked at the calendar marking the start of new chapter. The mission continued, but the tactics had changed from combat to policy and law. It was still war, but it was fought with documents and signatures instead of bullets. Maya drank the coffee and felt the warmth spread through her body slowly. She was ready for whatever came next because she had nothing left to fear. The truth was her armor and justice was her weapon in this new fight. She walked out the door and into the world ready to make her mark. The legacy of her team would live on through the changes she implemented. Maya drove to work and parked the car, stepping out with confidence in stride. The building waited for her, and the work waited for her skilled hands. She entered the lobby and greeted the staff with a smile and nod. The day began, and the mission moved forward one step at a time. Maya sat at her desk and opened the first file of the new role. The pen was in her hand, and the power to change things was real. She signed the document and set it aside, ready for the next task. The work was hard, but it was worth every ounce of effort she gave. For the 4 who died, and for the many who would live because of it. Maya looked up from the desk and gazed out the window at the sky. It was blue and clear and full of promise for the future of all. She turned back to her work and focused on the details of the case. The world was watching, and she would not let them down in their trust. The mission was clear, and the path was lit by the light of truth. Maya worked on knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The end was not in sight, but the journey was the reward itself. She continued to write and to fight for the ones who could not speak. The silence was broken, and the voices of the fallen were finally heard. Maya smiled as she signed another paper, knowing that justice was being served. The system was healing, and the wounds were closing slowly but surely over time. She was the surgeon, and the evidence was the scalpel cutting out the cancer. Maya leaned back and took a breath, feeling the satisfaction of a job well done. The day ended, and she packed her bag ready to leave the office behind. She walked out into the evening air and looked up at the stars above. They twinkled like the eyes of her friends watching over her from heaven. Maya waved to the sky and got in her car to drive home for night. The engine started, and the radio played a song that reminded her of them. She sang along softly as the city lights passed by the windows of car. Home was waiting, and rest was needed for the battles of the tomorrow. Maya arrived and parked the car, walking up the steps to her front door. She unlocked it and stepped inside the quiet sanctuary that was hers alone. The photos on the wall seemed to glow in the dim light of hallway. Maya touched the frame of the team leader and whispered good night to him. She went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water before heading to bed. The day was done, and the mission was progressing according to the plan. Maya slept peacefully, knowing that she was making a difference in the world. The night passed, and the sun rose again, bringing new opportunities for change. Maya woke up and started the cycle again, ready to face the challenges. The work never ended, but neither did the resolve to see it through. She was a soldier of truth, and she would serve until her last breath. The legacy was secure, and the future was brighter because of the sacrifice. Maya dressed and left the house, ready to continue the fight for justice. The road was long, but she was not walking it alone anymore today. The world was with her, and the truth was on her side always. Maya drove to work and prepared to make another dent in the armor of corruption. The battle was won, but the war required constant vigilance and unwavering commitment. She was ready for it, and she would not falter in her duty now. The mission was life, and the life was the mission for her always. Maya entered the building and began the day with a clear and focused mind. The work awaited, and she was eager to start the process of reform. She sat down and opened the files, ready to dig into the details. The truth was waiting to be found, and she was the one to find it. Maya worked tirelessly knowing that every detail mattered in the pursuit of justice. The sun set, and the lights came on in the office where she worked. She stayed late because the job was not done until it was done right. Maya finally left and drove home under the cover of the night sky. She was tired but satisfied with the progress made during the long day. The cycle continued, and the mission moved forward with steady and sure steps. Maya was the catalyst, and the change was happening because of her efforts. The world was better, and the soldiers were safer because of the new rules. Maya knew that the fight was worth every second of the struggle and pain. She would never stop, and she would never surrender to the forces of greed. The truth was her shield and her sword in the battle for integrity. Maya lived for the mission, and the mission lived through her actions every day. The legacy was eternal, and the names of the fallen were honored forever. Maya smiled as she drifted off to sleep knowing that she had done well. The dreams were sweet, and the rest was deep and restoring for her soul. Morning came, and the cycle began again with new energy and fresh hope. Maya was ready, and the world was waiting for the next move in game. She stepped out the door and into the light ready to lead the way. The path was clear, and the destination was justice for all who served. Maya walked forward with purpose, and the future unfolded before her open eyes. The story was not over, but the chapter of revenge was closed forever now. The chapter of healing had begun, and it would last for the rest of time. Maya was the author, and the pen was in her hand to write it. She wrote with truth, and she wrote with love for the brothers she lost. The book was long, but the pages were filled with hope and redemption. Maya turned the page and started the next sentence with a steady hand. The words were powerful, and the message was clear for all to read. Justice had been served, and the balance was restored to the scales. Maya stood tall and looked at the horizon knowing that the sun would rise. It was a new day and a new beginning for her and for the world. The past was honored, and the future was protected by her vigilance. Maya breathed in the air and felt the life pulsing through her veins. She was alive and she was free, and she was ready for anything. The mission was complete, but the service continued in a different form. Maya accepted the change and embraced the new role with open arms. The journey was long, but the destination was worth every step of way. She walked on knowing that she was never alone as long as she remembered. The team was with her in spirit and in the work she did. Maya smiled and kept moving forward into the light of the new dawn. The end was a beginning, and the beginning was a promise kept. She was the keeper of the flame, and the flame would never go out. Maya stood firm, and the world turned around her with respect and honor. The story was told, and the truth was known by all who heard it. Maya rested in the knowledge that she had made a difference that mattered. The legacy was secure, and the names were written in the stars above. She looked up and saw the light shining down on her from heaven. Maya nodded and turned back to the work that waited for her here. The mission was life, and the life was the mission for her always. She served with honor, and she lived with purpose until the very end. The story closed, but the impact remained forever in the hearts of many. Maya was a hero not because of what she did, but who she was. She was a warrior for truth and a guardian of the fallen souls. The world was better because she had walked through the fire and survived. Maya stood tall, and the sun rose on a new era of accountability. The darkness was gone, and the light remained to guide the way home. She was home, and she was safe, and she was ready for the future. Maya took a breath and stepped into the day with confidence and grace. The journey was over, but the legend would live on for generations to come. She was the silence broken, and the voice for those who could not speak. Maya was the truth, and the truth would set the world free finally. The final chapter of the investigation closed with the sentencing of the last conspirator. Maya watched from the gallery as the judge delivered the verdict in court. Life in prison without parole was the penalty for the crimes committed against state. It was not justice for the dead, but it was accountability for the living. Maya left the courthouse and stepped into the sunlight feeling the weight lift. The media was there, but she did not stop to give any statements today. She had said all she needed to say, and the record was now clear. Maya drove to the cemetery, where her team was buried under the green grass. She parked the car and walked the path she had walked many times before. The headstones were clean, and fresh flowers were placed at the base of each. Maya knelt by the first grave and placed a single red rose on stone. She spoke quietly to the friend who had pushed her into the ditch that day. "I kept my promise," she said, and the wind seemed to answer her softly. She moved to the next grave, and then the next until she had visited all. Each name was spoken aloud, and each memory was honored with a moment of silence. Maya stood up and looked at the row of graves stretching out before her eyes. They were not gone, they were just waiting for her to join them someday. Until then, she would live for them and keep their stories alive in world. She walked back to the car and drove away from the cemetery slowly. The sun was setting, and the sky was painted in colors of orange and purple. Maya arrived at the bar where the journey had begun so many months ago. The sign was lit, and the door was open, welcoming her into the warm light. Inside, the familiar faces were waiting at the table in the back corner. Jax and Kira stood up when she entered and raised their glasses in toast. Maya joined them and sat down, feeling the comfort of the shared history. They did not speak of the trial or the verdict or the long fight. They spoke of the future and the plans they had for the next year. Jax was opening a new training facility, and Kira was starting a non-profit. Maya told them about her new role and the work she would be doing. They listened and nodded, knowing that she would excel at whatever she chose. The bond between them was unbreakable, and it would last for the rest of lives. They drank to the fallen, and they drank to the living who carried the torch. The night was filled with laughter and stories that honored the memory of friends. Maya looked around the room and saw a community that supported each other always. It was a sanctuary for those who had served and those who understood the cost. She felt a sense of belonging that she had not felt in a long time. The pain was still there, but it was no longer the only thing she felt. Hope had returned, and it was stronger than the grief that had held her. Maya finished her drink and stood up to leave the bar for the night. She hugged Jax and Kira and promised to see them again very soon. They walked her to the door and watched her get into her car safely. Maya waved and drove away, knowing that she was never truly alone in this. The road home was quiet, and the stars were bright above the dark highway. She arrived at her apartment and parked the car in the designated spot. Maya walked up the stairs and unlocked the door to her quiet home. Inside, the photos on the wall seemed to smile at her from their frames. She walked over and touched the challenge coin resting on the shelf gently. It was cold to the touch, but it held the warmth of their memory. Maya sat on the couch and looked at the wall, thinking about the journey. It had been hard and it had been painful, but it had been worth it. She had found the truth, and she had made the world a better place. That was all she could ask for, and it was enough for her soul. Maya closed her eyes and let the silence of the room wrap around her. The silence was not empty anymore, it was filled with the presence of love. She drifted into sleep with a smile on her face and peace in heart. The dreams were of green fields and blue skies and friends running free. They waved to her and told her that she had done good by them. Maya slept through the night without waking and woke up refreshed for day. The sun was shining, and the birds were singing outside her window loudly. She made coffee and looked at the calendar, marking the start of new chapter. The mission continued, but the tactics had changed from combat to policy and law. It was still war, but it was fought with documents and signatures instead of bullets. Maya drank the coffee and felt the warmth spread through her body slowly. She was ready for whatever came next because she had nothing left to fear. The truth was her armor, and justice was her weapon in this new fight. She walked out the door and into the world ready to make her mark. The legacy of her team would live on through the changes she implemented. Maya drove to work and parked the car, stepping out with confidence in stride. The building waited for her, and the work waited for her skilled hands. She entered the lobby and greeted the staff with a smile and nod. The day began, and the mission moved forward one step at a time. Maya sat at her desk and opened the first file of the new role. The pen was in her hand, and the power to change things was real. She signed the document and set it aside ready for the next task. The work was hard, but it was worth every ounce of effort she gave. For the 4 who died, and for the many who would live because of it. Maya looked up from the desk and gazed out the window at the sky. It was blue and clear and full of promise for the future of all. She turned back to her work and focused on the details of the case. The world was watching, and she would not let them down in their trust. The mission was clear, and the path was lit by the light of truth. Maya worked on knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The end was not in sight, but the journey was the reward itself. She continued to write and to fight for the ones who could not speak. The silence was broken, and the voices of the fallen were finally heard. Maya smiled as she signed another paper, knowing that justice was being served. The system was healing, and the wounds were closing slowly but surely over time. She was the surgeon, and the evidence was the scalpel cutting out the cancer. Maya leaned back and took a breath, feeling the satisfaction of a job well done. The day ended, and she packed her bag ready to leave the office behind. She walked out into the evening air and looked up at the stars above. They twinkled like the eyes of her friends watching over her from heaven. Maya waved to the sky and got in her car to drive home for night. The engine started, and the radio played a song that reminded her of them. She sang along softly as the city lights passed by the windows of car. Home was waiting, and rest was needed for the battles of the tomorrow. Maya arrived and parked the car, walking up the steps to her front door. She unlocked it and stepped inside the quiet sanctuary that was hers alone. The photos on the wall seemed to glow in the dim light of hallway. Maya touched the frame of the team leader and whispered good night to him. She went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water before heading to bed. The day was done, and the mission was progressing according to the plan. Maya slept peacefully knowing that she was making a difference in the world. The night passed, and the sun rose again, bringing new opportunities for change. Maya woke up and started the cycle again, ready to face the challenges. The work never ended, but neither did the resolve to see it through. She was a soldier of truth, and she would serve until her last breath. The legacy was secure, and the names of the fallen were honored forever. Maya smiled as she drifted off to sleep, knowing that she had done well. The dreams were sweet, and the rest was deep and restoring for her soul. Morning came, and the cycle began again with new energy and fresh hope. Maya was ready, and the world was waiting for the next move in game. She stepped out the door and into the light, ready to lead the way. The path was clear, and the destination was justice for all who served. Maya walked forward with purpose, and the future unfolded before her open eyes. The story was not over, but the chapter of revenge was closed forever now. The chapter of healing had begun, and it would last for the rest of time. Maya was the author, and the pen was in her hand to write it. She wrote with truth, and she wrote with love for the brothers she lost. The book was long, but the pages were filled with hope and redemption. Maya turned the page and started the next sentence with a steady hand. The words were powerful, and the message was clear for all to read. Justice had been served, and the balance was restored to the scales. Maya stood tall and looked at the horizon, knowing that the sun would rise. It was a new day and a new beginning for her and for the world. The past was honored, and the future was protected by her vigilance. Maya breathed in the air and felt the life pulsing through her veins. She was alive, and she was free, and she was ready for anything. The mission was complete, but the service continued in a different form. Maya accepted the change and embraced the new role with open arms. The journey was long, but the destination was worth every step of way. She walked on knowing that she was never alone as long as she remembered. The team was with her in spirit and in the work she did. Maya smiled and kept moving forward into the light of the new dawn. The end was a beginning, and the beginning was a promise kept. She was the keeper of the flame, and the flame would never go out. Maya stood firm, and the world turned around her with respect and honor. The story was told, and the truth was known by all who heard it. Maya rested in the knowledge that she had made a difference that mattered. The legacy was secure, and the names were written in the stars above. She looked up and saw the light shining down on her from heaven. Maya nodded and turned back to the work that waited for her here. The mission was life, and the life was the mission for her always. She served with honor, and she lived with purpose until the very end. The story closed, but the impact remained forever in the hearts of many. Maya was a hero not because of what she did, but who she was. She was a warrior for truth and a guardian of the fallen souls. The world was better because she had walked through the fire and survived. Maya stood tall, and the sun rose on a new era of accountability. The darkness was gone, and the light remained to guide the way home. She was home, and she was safe, and she was ready for the future. Maya took a breath and stepped into the day with confidence and grace. The journey was over, but the legend would live on for generations to come. She was the silence broken, and the voice for those who could not speak. Maya was the truth, and the truth would set the world free finally. The end.